Written by the Victorian British poet and textile designer William Morris, The Sundering Flood is an example of fantasy literature before the advent of Lord Dunsany, pulp fantasy writers, and J.R.R. Tolkien. The Sundering Flood is the name of a massive river that splits the fantasy setting in two. Osburn and Elfhild live on opposite sides, but after a chance encounter, they continue to meet and share stories about their lives, growing in affection for each other. However, unlike Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty, they don't risk trying to cross the river, so we don't get a fantasy version of Louisiana Woman, Mississippi Man, which is a bit of a shame. After an attack by raiders on both sides of the river, Elfhild disappears, and Osburn swears to go in search of her. During the next 5 years, he enters into the service of the Lord of Longshaw, Sir Godric, proves his valor on multiple occasions, and is instrumental in helping Godric overthrow the king and barons who control the de facto capital of the city of the Sundering Flood, which sits at the mouth of the river. Despite his success, Osburn is dejected because his few leads toward finding Elfhild have all come to dead ends. When he is waylaid by vengeful enemies, Osburn is guided to safe shelter where he finds Elfhild, and right out of a Peaches and Herb song, they are reunited. Elfhild's story is recounted of how 5 years ago she was kidnapped by raiders along with her foster mother and became the respected hostage of Sir Mark the Blue Knight, who is honorable but doomed by his loyalty to his lord. He was part of the League of Barons that was overthrown by Osburn and Godric. Elfhild and Osburn, along with her foster mother, return to Osburn's old home of Wethermell, where they take positions of trust and authority, enjoying their shared life. Later, Godric comes to visit. He needs men to help him against rebel barons, but seeing that Osburn's life is so joyous, he refuses to recruit his old friend and best warrior. Instead, Godric tells Osburn to remain in Wethermell with Elfhild and delight in the life of peace and happiness that he has earned. In its broad strokes, the story sounds pretty good, but a buildup of details and authorial choices turn this book into a slog for me. To start, my preceding summary is more focused and coherent than its presentation in the novel. Because Morris considered his stories to be like chivalric romances, The Sundering Flood does not have a structure that approaches anything like a novel written in the last 150 years. It is episodic, meandering, and many times the story hinges on coincidence. At the halfway point, when Elfhild's kidnapping takes place, I thought the plot would become more structured, since Osburn openly states his goal is to search for and recover her. But the novel remains frustratingly episodic and unfocused, which is a missed opportunity. Were Morris not as dedicated to mimicking the structure of a medieval romance, he could have produced something more engaging in both the short term and for at least the latter half of the novel. For instance, we're told about Elfhild's activities during the 5 years in what amounts to a long exposition dump in the tail end of the story. It would have drawn me in way more if we would have followed both Osburn and Elfhild in alternating chapters, with the tension increasing as we see them pulled away from each other while they both desperately want to reunite. Similarly, seeing that Sir Mark is a decent sort of guy who has helped and cared for Elfhild would have added stakes and dramatic irony to the large confrontation between him, standing with the king and barons, against Sir Godric and Osburn. There would have been more weight to that struggle, and the reader might have divided feelings about who they want to see succeed. This structural choice would have been significantly in the novel's favor, and arguably fitting with the old style of storytelling. After all, the Iliad deploys a similar structure as we get to see both the invading Greeks and the defending Trojans, and we're led into having sympathies for people on both sides of the war. Morris also commits to using archaic language, which was old-fashioned even before he started writing in the late 1800s. It's clear he made the choice to reinforce the medieval chivalric qualities of the story. When reading, however, it comes across like someone too enthusiastic at a Renaissance festival. This English isn't the way Morris knew and used it personally, and it reads like artifice, embellished and distracting. The novel lacks the flexible muscularity of language that's seen in The Song of Roland or even Norse sagas. The language, like the novel's structure, is intentionally antiquated, but since it's presented as prose, it lacks a sense of music. For comparison, Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, written 300 years before the Sundering Flood, is presented in specific stanzas with a rhythm and meter that propels the narrative. Ultimately, this book keeps putting up needless barriers to the reader. None of the obstacles alone is fatal, but taken altogether, I was doing a lot of work for trivial gains. I don't hate the book, but I can't shake the sense that different choices would have made the novel better and more accessible. I can only give a limited recommendation for The Sundering Flood. If you're interested in reading an early fantasy novel that helped influence later writers like Tolkien, you can buckle down and read this one. Otherwise, there are much better books along these same lines. The romance of Tristan and Isolde is clearly one of the inspirations for this novel and has been told and retold in variations for nearly 1,000 years. Don Quixote by Cervantes is richer, more complex, and more rewarding as the story of a man trying to live out a chivalric tale. Lord Dunsany's stories, written not long after those of Morris, are much more accessible while being stylistically weird fantasy fiction. Guy Gavriel Kay's A Song for Arbonne is an excellent contemporary fantasy novel that also captures the spirit of a medieval romance. If you want to try something a little different, then the Shikanoko and Otori novels by Leanne Hearn borrow from classical Chinese and Japanese folklore to build fantasy novels that feel like older stories. Have you read The Sundering Flood or any other works by William Morris? Do you think his novel deserves more credit for helping to establish the fantasy genre? What is your attitude toward authors using archaic language or stylistic devices to give their stories a different texture? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. Up next in the box of paperbacks is Slow Fall to Dawn, a space opera about a guild of assassins, written by Stephen Lay. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my peculiar notions. If you appreciate this channel and want to support it, you know what to do. You can also take a moment to like, comment, share, or subscribe to another YouTube creator you enjoy, because the algorithm is more capricious than fate in any medieval romance. Until next time, read some good books, live, and be well.